Bethesda Softworks is a company for many that only brings up one of three emotions.
No.
Shut up and take my money.
Wait, SpongeBob! We're not cavemen! We have technology!
However you feel about Bethesda, one thing I can guarantee is that you have picked up a Bethesda game, whether it was published or developed by them, and you enjoyed it in some way, shape, or form. But in recent memory, you might have picked up tons of Bethesda games and just not really been all that interested in what they were selling you. This is the unfortunate reality for millions of gamers around the world. This part will be very much so streamlined. It won't be as in-depth as the second part, which will be purely on the fall of Bethesda, while this part is on the rise. Either way, I still hope you enjoy, and I understand that a two-part series is frustrating, but unfortunately the video would have been about an hour if I did it all in one part, and the algorithm just doesn't like pushing those long videos. Either way, I hope you enjoy. Please like and subscribe if you do, and let's get into the rise of Bethesda. Bethesda's founding begins with one Christopher Weaver and Ed Fletcher. They came together to found Media Technology in June 1981. Media Technology would work on video games for Laserdisc-based systems. The company ran strong for a couple years until the video game crash in 1984. This led to contracts drying up and other work in the video game industry just really being hard to come by. So to try and fill time until new contracts were available to them, they bought a couple personal computers and began working on video games, but for the personal computers. This is when Fletcher used his love for American football to come up with a game based on the sport. It would be dubbed Gridiron. Although Weaver didn't love the idea as he is not an American football fan, he did back it, and Fletcher got to work on the game using Weaver's home as his headquarters. The project really wasn't supposed to be anything massive, so they didn't hire any animators and they certainly didn't hire any artists. This led to the game being kind of outdated for 1986. Gridiron was only developed in roughly 9 months. This is obviously because they didn't really expect the game to be all that good. The two decided to name this new development branch of media technology Bethesda Softworks, which is completely based off of the fact that Weaver's home was located in Bethesda, Maryland. For being the founders of one of the most unique genre-defining companies in gaming, they certainly weren't that creative. Either way, they did try to name it something more unique to a degree, but clearly wasn't that unique as a company already had the trademark. For those of you that are curious what this name would have been, it would have been Softwork. But either way, now that they had their new development branch ready to go with a name, they decided to release Gridiron. It would release to around a couple hundred copies being sold, which for them was actually the game being sold out. This shocking success would lead them to shift their entire business model towards more development of video games instead of their previous work. A year after they released Gridiron, they would strike a deal up with none other than Electronic Arts, who were in this video and this video. This deal would see, well, Bethesda work on John Madden of all games, and ironically enough, EA would get the distribution rights to Gridiron. Unfortunately for both parties, this deal would make absolutely no money, as Gridiron would not release a new version, and Bethesda would sue EA for $7.3 million. They claimed that EA stopped them from releasing any other versions of Gridiron, and were stealing the features of Gridiron and putting them into their new game. This case would later be settled out of court with a resolution that is undisclosed to the public. Every single video I have made on EA to this point is always a negative one, and then even when I try to avoid EA, somehow they still come up in a negative light. It is truly something special.
Go away!
Either way, after the lawsuit, Bethesda was ready to move on from Gridiron, and they decided to work on a Wayne Gretzky hockey game instead, which was a massive success, moving 330 million copies. Yeah, it was decent. They would also work on Escape from Singles Castle and Hockey League Simulator in the same year, 1989. Seeing some solid success with Wayne Gretzky and other decent releases, they decided to work on their first self-published game. This first self-published game was chosen to be 1991's Terminator. Although we don't have solid release numbers, as this was 1991, it did top the charts, and it was a decent success at the bare minimum. Bethesda really wouldn't continue their self-publishing endeavors for a little while, as they would move on through 1994 to work on Home Alone, Where's Waldo, NCAA basketball, and more Terminator games. They weren't really making any big bang in the industry, but they were certainly making some sustainable cash flow. Just to give you an idea of what Bethesda was like during this time period, think of a studio like Hi-Res Studios, releasing unspectacular games that ultimately do make you some sustainable cash, but doesn't really give you a cult following. That's the sort of studio Bethesda was. They released good products, and sure, they were solid games, but they didn't really give them a cult following or a returning player base. Any company that's trying to make it big knows that that is a severe problem. So using this line of thinking, they decided to release Elder Scrolls Arena in March 25th of 1994. This is one of many attempts to diversify the games that they were making to try and actually grow a fan base. And when it released, Elder Scrolls was a pretty underwhelming release, only getting about 120,000 units sold in its entire lifetime. Just to compare for Bethesda, Wayne Gretzky Hockey, which was their second ever game, sold 350,000 copies in around the same time. Despite an underwhelming release, they didn't want to give up on the Elder Scrolls IP. As an IP, they believed it truly did have a lot of potential to make a lot of money. Heading into 1995, they would release the Terminator Future Shock and PBA bowling games, continuing with their licensed releases. But heading into 1996, they would release the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall in September 20th of 1996. Daggerfall, for many critics and fans, would be seen as an improvement over Arena. And if they thought that they would be seeing a little bit of an improvement in the sales numbers, well, I highly doubt they expected 700,000 copies to be sold. It was a massive success for the company, and it put them on the map. I want to throw this in here just because, I kind of thought it was fucking hilarious. Media Technology, the parent company of Bethesda, sued a U.S. Senator, Joe Lieberman, and another U.S. Senator, Herb Kohl, for making comments that said the game was maybe not appropriate for people under the age of 18 to play. The senators would snap back and say that this was a publicity stunt from Bethesda and that they were just trying to improve sales for the game. It was 1000% a publicity stunt. I mean, what in the actual fuck were they expecting to accomplish by suing a United States senator? Back on topic though, Bethesda, coming off of a really solid release in Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, they were feeling confident, and moving into 1997 and 1998, they were maybe a little too confident because they would release two spin-offs to the Elder Scrolls franchise. They would be dubbed Elder Scrolls Battle Spire and Redguard, both of which so massively underperformed that Bethesda considered filing bankruptcy because of it.
Reinvest the earnings into foreign currency accounts with compounding interest, and it's gone.
Obviously, that's a bit dramatic. These two games underperforming wasn't the main reason, but all of their games underperforming was the main reason. Those 2 years had been particularly rough, and it doesn't help that the company decided to expand to over 75 employees in 1997. It's a similar thing that we've seen with my Telltale video. Expanding too quickly when it isn't really necessary or sustainable is never a smart idea. It doesn't make you this household name just because you have more employees or you can put out more projects. People will buy and people will support you if you just release good games. Thankfully for Bethesda, though, they were able to sustain themselves through this rather rough time, and they weren't really releasing great games at the time, but they were releasing good enough games to survive. Some of these being Burnout Championship Drag Racing and their PBA bowling games. 2 years after basically being bankrupt, Bethesda was sold to, you probably guessed it, ZeniMax Media. This acquisition happened in 1999, and what's weird is that ZeniMax Media was also founded in 1999. Now, it actually turns out that that's not confusing at all, because ZeniMax Media was founded by Christopher Weaver, and as it turns out, he probably just gave himself a really good price on his own company. The whole purpose of this entire backwards flip-flopping of parent companies for Bethesda was because ZeniMax Media had the backing of investors. The original company did not, and Bethesda needed a little bit of extra money. After the acquisition in the same year, they decided to expand to over 100 employees because, well, you have a little bit of extra dough, you might as well spend it. Either way, after switching parent companies, Bethesda decided that they were going to look towards the new century and come out with a bang. And heading into the 2000s, Bethesda did not come out with a bang and kept releasing the same old bullshit. The same old bullshit, meaning drag racing games, bowling games, and for some reason, with these amazing games being dropped by Bethesda, they decided that they were going to need 2 different brands to work on publishing and another to work on development. And so they decided that they were going to keep Bethesda Softworks as publishing, and then they were going to create Bethesda Game Studios, which was officially established in 2001 as the development. But it was a pretty seamless change, nobody really cared, so when it was announced that Elder Scrolls 3 was coming May 1st, 2002 for the Windows and in June 6, 2002 for the Xbox, people were hyped, obviously. I mean, if you were a fan of the previous, this was promising to be even bigger and badder. So finally, when Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind did launch on May 1st, 2002, it sold amazingly. Over 990,000 units were moved in the United States alone, earning almost, if not over, $11.7 million. It was a smash hit, and for fans, they actually seen the game as a major improvement over the previous. Bethesda was rising to the top, and it seemed like nobody could stop them. They were in a strong financial position, their fans loved them, and they looked amazing on the outside. Only one man, though, was a little bit upset about ZeniMax's rise, and that was its co-founder, Christopher Weaver.
It's called a hustle, sweetheart.
The founder of Bethesda, who filed a lawsuit against ZeniMax in 2002 after he left the company. He was saying that he was ousted from the company and didn't receive his $1.2 million in severance pay. Holy fuck. That's a lot of money for being kicked out of your own company. ZeniMax made sure to respond to this lawsuit by suing Christopher Weaver and moving to have his case dismissed, claiming that Weaver went through employee emails to find evidence against them. At the end of the day, the case didn't get dismissed, but it did get settled out of court by all parties involved, and we don't know exactly what happened, and we don't know what the settlement was. All we know is that this thing was fucking pointless, because all parties settling out of court basically means, yeah, I mean, we both fucked up, let's move on. Weaver still held on to his majority stake in the company, and ZeniMax kind of just went on to become a fucking juggernaut in the industry, so, you know, whatever. Pushing forward to 2004, after a pretty successful 2002 outside of being sued by your own co-founder, Bethesda announced that they had acquired the Fallout IP from Interplay. They also announced that Interplay will no longer be working on the Fallout 3 development, and instead they will take it over. On top of that, they also revealed that Interplay will be working on a Fallout MMO that will be published by Bethesda. Bethesda just wanted to keep growing, they wanted IPs, they wanted to really expand, and Morrowind was their first taste of it. This expanding was only fueled even further when Bethesda, just 2 years after the Fallout news, would release Elder Scrolls Oblivion on March 20th, 2006 for Windows and the Xbox 360. With the PlayStation port coming later in 2007. Coming off of a pretty solid release of Morrowind, they were probably expecting a small improvement in sales, but not the massive jump that Oblivion would prove to be. Oblivion was massive. It sold over 3 million copies by January 2007 before the PlayStation 3 version was even released. It ended up selling around 9.5 million copies worldwide throughout its life cycle. It raked in the big bucks, and for Bethesda, it was now their guaranteed moneymaker no matter what. To add on top of that, they had Fallout 3 coming very soon, so the expectations for the future of this company was massive.
And do you know what else is massive?
Moving forward from the Oblivion release, the company ended up working on a lot of licensed games like Pirates of the Caribbean and 4 Star Trek games through 2006 and 2007. People were obviously pretty hyped about Bethesda coming off of such a release. I mean, although the Pirates of the Caribbean games were, I mean, let's be real, kind of fucking terrible, and the Star Trek games were also kind of fucking terrible, it didn't matter. Those were published games and weren't developed by Bethesda. So people kept their expectations very high, and heading into 2008, the studio had a game for them. In October 28th of 2008, Fallout 3 would release for the Windows, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. And if Oblivion was Bethesda's best-selling game to this point and was a major milestone for the company, Fallout 3 just took it a whole nother level. The game would move 4.7 million copies worldwide in just a couple weeks, making over $300 million. The game would end up selling around 12.4 million copies worldwide throughout its life cycle. Although there was some controversy with the Australian version of the game not initially being classified for drug use and the company, kind of working around that a little bit, it was pretty flawless. For many people, they just loved the game. They beloved it to this day, and it is still rated as one of, if not the best Fallout games to ever be created. Fallout 3 put Bethesda on a whole new level with publishers like Rockstar Games, 2K, and EA. They were a big dog in the industry, and after the release of Fallout 3, obviously having some disposable income helps with keeping up with those major companies. Bethesda also instituted a bit of a trial and error when it came to publishing games due to, again, having disposable income. In 2009, they would see some controversy with the release of Wet and Rogue Warrior, which, yeah, who's heard of Wet? And if you've heard of Rogue Warrior, it's not for a good reason. Then just 1 year later, after those massive flops in 2010, they would publish Fallout New Vegas, which was a smash hit and is rated as one of the best Fallout games to ever be created. It got a massive 11.6 million copies worldwide. So yeah, publishing games like Wet and then Rogue Warrior and then publishing Fallout New Vegas is quite the trial and error. Either way, however you look at those games, Wet and Rogue Warrior were a stain on the reputation for sure, but Fallout New Vegas almost immediately wiped those stains away and put the company right back to where they were going to be anyway. Before we move on from 2009 and 2010, there's one more thing I want to discuss that happened in this time period. Now, you remember that Fallout MMO that I mentioned once from Interplay and never mentioned again? Well, you're probably wondering what happened to it. Well, not good things. Bethesda ended up filing a lawsuit against Interplay as they were pretty mad about the current state of the game. Ultimately, the lawsuit really never went anywhere as Bethesda just said, you know what, we're just not going to pay you. And Interplay was like, all right, we'll just stop working on it. And then the game just died. It's kind of ironic that a multiplayer game, that is said, the Fallout franchise was killed off by Bethesda because it didn't meet performance expectations. Oh, Bethesda.
Now, can anyone tell me what foreshadowing is? Yes, Miss Granger.
Foreshadowing is a dramatic device in which an important plot point is mentioned early in the story to return later in a more significant way.
The final thing that would really need to be discussed from 2009 was ZeniMax acquiring its software. The only relevance is because now Bethesda will be publishing all the games like Doom and Wolfenstein. Now moving forward into 2011, Bethesda would continue their trial and error process. They would publish games like Brink and Rage, which were some legendary games, we'll say. And then they would also go on to publish Elder Scrolls V Skyrim in November 11th of 2011 for the Xbox 360, the Windows computer, and the PlayStation 3. Oh yeah, and of course Skyrim would later go on to release on the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and S. Skyrim was basically the GTA 5 before GTA 5, released on a bunch of different platforms, while the next game seemingly is never coming out. To make matters worse for Elder Scrolls fans, if Rockstar fans felt like they had it rough, well, GTA 6 is actually taking less time to come out than Elder Scrolls 6. Yes, Elder Scrolls is going to take longer than GTA 6. So stop crying, you little babies. Despite the success of Skyrim, notably though, Skyrim did have a lot of criticism for bugs, which weren't yet really all that common in Bethesda games. Also in 2011, Bethesda had filed a lawsuit against Mojang for using the Scrolls name in a card game, which didn't necessarily make them look like the good guys in this scenario. Elder Scrolls Online would be their next title that they would publish, with Elder Scrolls Online clearly trying to piggyback off of Skyrim's success. Obviously though, Elder Scrolls Online was not Skyrim, and it received its own player base and a ton of updates that to this day are still coming out. And then they kept just dropping bangers, with the publishing wing of Bethesda publishing Wolfenstein: The New Order and The Evil Within in 2014. Both technically underperformed sales-wise, but were beloved by their fan bases. Bethesda was working on a game behind the scenes, however, a game that they believed was going to expand their franchise even further, a game that they believed was going to make them a billion-dollar company no matter what. Now that this video is in the books and you finished it, which I appreciate greatly, I have a question for you. Do you prefer the gaming graveyard version of going in depth and looking very, very deeply at every single game and all of the details? Or did you prefer this more streamlined version where I cover the big moments and then I kind of skip over everything else? Which one do you prefer? Or do you like both? And I will make both. It's just up to the audience of what they prefer. Then the second question being, do you like the cutaway gags, as I'm calling them, in this video? I added a little bit more personality to this video, I think, and not like in my voice or anything, but just in the content I was putting out. Like there was cutaway gags, there was jokes being made. Or do you like the more serious tone and not so many jokes as I did here? That's basically my questions. If you do answer them in the comments, I am greatly appreciative. If you don't, thanks for watching anyway, and I hope you enjoyed.